Well, people, story time again. I'm here to tell you another little short story about my life. We're gonna go back in time, in a time machine, travel back to a day when I was living on Bleecker Street, or in between Parliament and Sherbourne Street. I lived on Bleecker Street. I lived in a red brick house. It was all red and had gray steps on the front. 2 or 3 little steps and then a little area 2 or 3 feet wide before you went into the house. It was close to the church. There was a church on the corner, and the church had a house, I don't know, forget what you call it now, but it was a house on the corner also, and had big windows in the front. I used to go down there on Sundays or Saturday afternoons, and in the front room, a bunch of kids, little kids, young kids like myself, used to play records, and that was the first time I heard Mamas and Papas doing California Dreamin' that year. I think that was '64. But anyway, I'm talking about the year 1963 when I first moved into the house. I lived on Bleecker Street from '63, '64, '65, something like that. But I went to Winchester School for grades 6, 7, and 8. Before that, in grade 5, I went to Regent Park, which is no longer there. I went there in grade 5. That was the first school I went to when I came up from St. John, New Brunswick. But I'm talking about the day I lived on Bleecker Street. I stepped out my front door. I was going down to the corner store. Right on the corner, they called it the corner store. It was on the corner. And there was a young boy there too. His name was Barry Armoritz, and we became friends. And we used to go to Hyde Park on Saturday mornings at 6 o'clock in the morning, catch the streetcar, go to Hyde Park and go fishing. Yeah. I don't even remember if we caught anything, but we took our fishing rods with us and our gear, and we went off Saturday morning, him and I. But I'm not talking about Barry. But he was a good guy. I knew him for a few years too. So I go stepping out my front door. Well, I'm going to go down to the corner store, and I'm going to go down there. I'm heading down there to buy some comic books. Comic books at that time, I believe, were 12 cents each, 12 cents. So if you had $1 and you went to the corner store, you got some, 3 or 4 comic books. You got a bag of chips, you got a Joe Louis, you got a Coke, right? Man, I'm telling you. So anyway, I step out my door, I go walking across the street. There's another kid on the other side of the street, and he's walking down the street, right? So we both end up at the corner store, right? Both of us. We're both going to the corner store, although at the time I didn't know it, right? So we both go into the corner store, and now he steps in the store, I step in the store, and as you step in the door's on there. I think the door, was the door on an angle? I think the door was on an angle, but I'm not quite sure. On the angle, like on the corner kind of thing. But we step in the door, and right on the right-hand side, there's this big magazine rack kind of shelf, right? You know, unit that's probably about 6, 7 feet long. 6, 7 feet long. And on the top they had magazines, you know, like all kinds of magazines, you know, everything you can imagine in '63. And at the bottom, some of these stores, variety stores at the time, right, had basically the same setup, right? This wall type unit made out of wood. And at the top it had slots in different places where they put magazines. And at the bottom there was comic books. Right? You had your basic DCs, right? And I think there was a few Marvels around back then in '63. It wasn't that many. There was more DCs, I think, if I remember right. And they also had the spinner rack. You know, the spinning rack, you know, you put the comics in. Comics are good for you, you turn it around. So him and I both ended up looking at the comic books, right? Him and I both were looking at the comic books. So we got to chatting, talking, you know, about Superman, Superboy, you know, topic, comic books, right? I think he was probably the same age as I was. In '63, he was probably 12 or 13, something like that, right? So we're both standing there talking about comic books. And I told him I had some comic books at my house, like I had a few, right? You know, not many, but I had a few. And he told me the same thing. He had comic books at his place. Now he lived in an apartment building. An apartment building in the front. He came out the back of the building, right? There was, you know, doors at the back, but the main part of the building was on Sherburne Street on the front, right? So we're both talking, and so we're there for a while. We're chatting. I bought some comic books and, you know, my bag of chips or my Coke or whatever, you know, my usual thing. And he did basically the same thing. He bought comic books and a drink and, you know, I don't know, something else. But he invited me back to his place. You know, come on back to my place, right? So I went, sure. So we went to his place and we went in and sit down in his front room. He was there by himself. He told me his mother was working. You know, his mother was working. She works, you know, at the hospital. She's a nurse. I said, oh. You know, I told him my mother worked at Lower Seacourt, I think it was. My dad was a painter and stuff. Anyway, we chatted and stuff. He showed me his comic books. We sat there and went through comic books and stuff like that, and had a great time. We both, I still remember that day, like now, like all these years later, right? It's like, I still remember that day. It's one of those days of what stands out kind of thing, you know, you remember? So we talked about comic books and stuff like that, and you know, regular DC stuff, the new Marvel comic books that were coming out, and chatted, you know. So a little while later, not much later, but a little while later, I didn't see him that often, not a lot anyway, but you know, so another time I saw him, he said that he was moving. Him and his mother were moving away, so that was the end of that story. So his name was Washington. Yeah, his first name was Washington. And his mom and him, he never talked about his dad, so I don't even know if he had a dad, but he never mentioned his dad, if I recall right. It was just him and his mom. But they moved away, and I never saw them again. But I remember that, you know, time period quite well. And the best thing about remembering him, that his name was Washington, and I don't remember his last name, but Washington, yeah, and him and his mother were both black. So I hope I said that right. I don't want to say anything bad, in a bad way, but yeah. So back in those days, in 1963, I didn't know very many black people. No, there was no. Well, there was, but back then, even in school in my grade, you know, grade 6 or grade 5, I had no black kids in my class. You know, so I remember that. So yeah, so this is just thoughts about what you can do and the things that you remember. So I remember Washington. Yeah, and we were both reading comic books, and he didn't come to my house. I don't know why. I don't know why I never invited him there, but I went to his house once, and we sat in his front room, and we looked at the comic books together. So yeah, that's another story from back when I was a little guy. I was 12 years old, buying comic books. I didn't find out I was collecting comic books probably until 1965 or 66 or something like that. Somebody actually called me a comic book collector, and I guess I was. I just didn't know it then. Short little story from Bob's past. Thought you might like to hear that. All right, I'll tell you another story some other day.